Welcome to another episode of FTA Global Marketing Stack 2025. I'm your host, Yatin Basim, VP Sales and Marketing, FTA Global. Most of the marketing campaigns work in silos. They sometimes create spike, they help you get your sales number, but eventually the effect fades. The real challenge is to build something that lasts for long and get you the compounding effect. Something that is beyond those small campaigns and the glitter. To discuss this topic in detail, which is compounds and campaigns, and the journey which is there, which is between campaigns to, a cycle between campaigns to compounding effect, we have with us Krisha Turakia, Head Marketing and Revenue at Urban Ladder. She's going to be talking about this topic in greater detail with us and will address certain questions that we have for our viewers. Welcome to the show.
So thanks for having me here. Great to be here, and I'd love to, discuss this more in detail.
Great. Good to have you here. So, Krisha, from FMCG brands like Himalaya Wellness to Paperboat, now to a consumer product brand, Urban Ladder, how your journey has been over these years?
It's been very interesting, as a marketeer working at Himalaya has been, very different because the company operates from a very problem solution point of view, especially for marketing and marketeers. Paperboat has been a complete, 180-degree turn where, the brand is bigger than the product, and most of what we do as a, from a brand point of view doesn't have product in it. And Urban Ladder has been, of course, a complete change of game because it's a different industry. It's been super interesting because, you are used to a certain pace working in FMCG. It's nice to bring that learning into a whole new industry. So, yeah.
Good to hear that. So you manage revenue and marketing both at Urban Ladder, right? There's a contrast sometimes. I take care of sales and marketing both at FTA, so I know morning there's discussion about numbers on sales and evening there's discussion on what we've achieved from the leads, right? Does your day, go through the same framework, or is there anything else in terms of metrics that you look at?
I think, because I manage a lot of online D2C marketplace revenue, I think it goes very hand in hand with marketing. So for me, I don't really look at it as two different verticals. For me, I believe that all marketing should eventually lead to sales. Having worked in startups, at least that's how my brain is wired now. So irrespective of whether I lead it or not, I, eventually want, marketing initiatives to have some sort of revenue outcomes. So I think I operate from that point of view, irrespective of whether I lead sales or not.
Cool. See, where I come from, every brand has their own strong visual and verbal pillars. They try and build brand ethos, tone of voice. Some creatives go throughout, the life of the brand. For example, if you look at Parle-G, that girl has been there on the packaging ever since the brand, started. What are those few things that you feel a brand should build on or work on, just to ensure that, it helps create that equity in the market, that recall value, and at the same time doesn't look repetitive?
Yeah, I mean, for me, everything that I do starts with positioning. And, I know quite a few marketeers, I wouldn't say all, but for whom positioning is just a nice fancy statement written in a strategic PPT, but for me, it is sort of the core of what I do. When I look at a brand or I take a brand on. So it's everything starts from positioning. Campaigns are, just a different way of communicating in a very different channel. While I think that those are always imperative and necessary for a brand, I think it's very important to have always on, sort of engagements with your consumers. And that's where, what you spoke about in terms of compounding and, building smaller assets which are beyond campaigns comes into place. So, if your brand can stay alive and your brand narrative can continue to, extend even beyond your campaigns, I feel that's when you've built a strong brand.
See, campaign communication strategy is derived from the fact, which is one of the factors that play a major role is the sales cycle, right? If you look at Urban Ladder, right, you've got core furniture products like sofas, you've got beds, dining tables. That's something that people would buy, once in 5 years or maybe a longer duration. Compared to that, you've got small utility, product as well. You're selling decoratives also, other utility items which have a smaller, sales cycle as well. At the same time, people often buy these products, right? And impulse buying is very, very prominent, right? How do you make sure that when it comes to your communication strategy for any particular campaign, you're catering to both the sides of the world in a proper way?
So at Urban Ladder, we have, broken down all our campaigns into top, mid, bottom funnel, right? And the communication direction and route is very different for each, depending on where the consumer is at. A lot of what we do, thanks to Google, Meta, they give you a lot of insights on what is the in-market audience today, right? So because we do a lot of digital work, we know consumers who are in market for certain large products, like you mentioned, sofas or beds. So the narrative, the communication that we have for those consumers is completely different. Where it's very brand led to build consideration for them, to show Urban Ladder's design first thinking. And it's very top of the funnel, pure brand narrative, right? More of thematics just to get them to consider the brand, because there are so many brands out there. There was a time when Urban Ladder was one of the only brands available, but today that's not the case. So, the communication strategy for the top funnel is very different. What we do, apart from that is once we, see people have moved through the journey and bought some of these larger goods with us, we do a lot of retargeting. We do a lot of other forms of communication with these customers. Not in the purpose of actually making them buy more from us, but, the idea is that once a consumer buys a piece of furniture, they're constantly looking of ways to make something different about it. You've bought a sofa, you might want to just change the cushion cover every now and then. You might want to change your throw every now and then. The need of constantly changing, right, is a very inherent human need. And people start doing smaller things with bigger pieces of furniture to actually, get that satisfaction out. So we send out a lot of communication on different ways of styling their furniture, different ways of, putting decor pieces together to match their furniture. We have a lot of course, bottom funnel ads that we run for a lot of accent pieces that go well with their furniture. So, we put all that together. And I mean, interestingly, for a category like this, it might be a very surprising number, but almost 50% of our online revenue comes from repeat today. So I think it's not just limited to decor, it's actually furniture.
Not sure if we can disclose the numbers, but if I may ask, out of this 50%, what percentage comes from these secondary products, these small utility? Because I think it's a good strategy.
Yeah.
Somebody who's bought a sofa now would probably not come back for another 5-10 years, right? Good.
Yeah, ironically, the purchase cycle is decreasing. It used to be 5-7 years. For a generation, above us, it was probably a lifetime.
20.
Yeah, or
20 plus years, yes.
Yeah. Now it's actually 3-4 years, because we see that, people don't get attached to their furniture as long as our parents would have otherwise.
Okay.
So the cycle is shorter, of course, but it's still 3 to 5 years. It's not a small cycle. But yeah, a lot of our repeat revenue, like you were asking, right, comes from a lot of these accent pieces. Urban Ladder is consciously not very strong on decor yet. But we do a lot of these smaller. So, for example, you have your coffee tables, your side tables. You have a lot of these accent pieces, which are quite strong in our portfolio, and that's where a lot of our repeat revenue comes from.
Good. You mentioned top of the funnel and mid funnel, and of course, towards the end, when it came to accent products, you said bottom of the funnel campaign. One thing that usually marketers feel difficulty is marrying the top of the funnel, spends with bottom funnel.
Yeah.
So if $1 is spent, what impact it generated for the revenue side, stitching that story often becomes difficult, right? How do you balance that, especially in category like yours, wherein one product is going to be sold for 3-year period versus something which, is perhaps a weekly purchase?
Yeah. It's not that hard for me personally, because, the way we look at creatives at Urban Ladder, they're not very different from the top to the bottom funnel. In fact, that's something that I wanted to tell you in terms of compounding and building brand, right? I truly believe that brand building can happen even with performance campaigns. And if you see a lot of the performance campaigns that we run here or I've ran in my previous organizations, a lot of brand building happens right there as well. So I don't look at it as a very, segmented sort of an approach. I look at it as a very free flowing approach. The mid and the bottom funnels are a very natural retargeting mechanisms, right? So the idea is to bring in as many people into the top funnel fold, and the rest of the engine sort of works on its own to kind of run. So I spend maybe a good chunk. I mean, I don't want to disclose numbers, but I would spend a larger chunk on bringing more people into the fold, into the brand. I think that's the hardest. And as a marketer, I feel like that's one of the most important metrics to grow a brand. And then the rest of the engine sort of works on its own. It's a lot more optimized because you have a smaller, tighter audience. Those campaigns work a lot more well. You don't need to spend as much on them. So that's how I sort of balance them out.
See, campaigns are often considered a way to get short-term success on sales numbers, right? But whereas if you compare it with the core idea, which is brand, eventually every brand is now focusing on building their name, the equity, especially when LLMs have come into picture. The clicks are decreasing, impression share has increased over a period of time. So brand and its equity is going to play a pivotal role. I have often observed that, whether it's in-house team or a external agency, right? Whenever there is a change in execution team, right? You often lose that momentum. And when you lose the momentum, somehow it affects your brand equity. What's your opinion on that?
No, I agree with you because, again, from a lot of what I've seen in the past, I've seen, when one team moves, all that gets left over in the name of, KT is just a set of folders with a lot of, campaigns or research of the past. What changed for me, and it's been a very impactful, incident that happened to me when I joined Paperboat, is when I took a handover from, the person who was managing the brand before me. We spent almost 8 to 10 hours just discussing the brand, and we spoke nothing of what the agency, who's working on the brand. None of the BAU sort of, conversations happened at all. We only spoke about what the positioning was, what the narrative was, how did it come, where was it, how did it get initiated, where does he see the brand going from here onwards, what was his direction and what did he think didn't work in the larger, scheme of things. So it was I almost understood his vision, and I almost, felt like I bought into it at some point, and I wanted to continue building that legacy ahead. And I feel like that's one thing that most people miss out on in, when they're switching or, shuffling teams. They miss out on actually, discussing what is more important. That's the brand narrative. I do this with my team at Urban Ladder. Even if I have the most junior, most person joining in my creative team, I sit with them and I actually explain the direction of the brand. Why did we, sort of arrive at this direction? I explain some of the things in terms of creative vision, what I want them to, sort of focus on. It's more of getting buy-ins, right? Sometimes you need, say top stakeholder buy-ins, but sometimes you also need like buy-ins from people who are actually working with you. And when they buy into the larger thought and the narrative, it becomes very easy because everyone's sort of chasing the same direction going from there. So I kind of have made it a practice now to have these long conversations with
Well,
everyone.
I think it's a good idea. Lesser amount of conflicts, and when everyone shares the same idea, I think eventually the goal is same.
Yeah.
So no fight. Now, if I'm looking at, you mentioned campaigns and everything. If I'm looking at a change, let's say I'll give you a quick scenario, and I really want to see what your response would have been if this was a real time situation. Let's say you've taken, handover of the brand. Say, for example, Urban Ladder. You've recently joined Urban Ladder, and the charter that you were planning to grow here is brand. How can I increase the recall value for Urban Ladder? Plus, make sure that it becomes synonym for furniture category. But eventually, the moment you joined, all of a sudden, there's a seasonal campaign that is up for running. How would you ensure that this seasonal campaign doesn't affect the core idea or the long-term vision of brand equity? Because sometimes when you run seasonal campaigns, right, promotions are a little tricky. Between lines, there are statements that people read. They often interpret the situations. How would you ensure that this seasonal campaign is not affecting the core idea?
So, in fact, this is not a hypothetical. It's something that's happened to me at a.
We would love to hear
Yeah. So I joined. I think at a time where they were sort of repositioning
Okay.
the brand. And I worked with my CEO to sort of work around what we reposition the brand to be. And this was very close to our season where, Diwali is a big season for furniture. So it was very close to then. So, we had to do everything where we kind of fixed what the larger narrative of the brand is. We fixed the positioning. And along with that, we had to also launch one of our biggest sale. And for the first time, we also launched a new product range. So everything sort of just came together, and you have almost 3 different agendas going out there, and you have, say, one marketing budget, right? So it was interesting because, again, for me, I feel like a lot of your CTA, because I also in this category, just to add in for your knowledge, it's a very slash priced category. So even if I wanted to not say sale, it's something that I have to say, 24/7, because that's how the category kind of operates. So, here we were trying to build a very premium, a very design forward, very design led narrative. And there we had to put in some elements of, sale or discounts and a very heavy CTA led narratives, right? I think what helped for us is, again, just, sort of breaking out the communications, right? Who are you communicating to and what stage? So finding somebody who's just very fresh into the category.
Oh.
For us, at least, we knew that at Urban Ladder, it was all about building consideration and not awareness, because it's a very well-known brand.
Yeah.
So building consideration was important because we wanted them to understand and see some of the fresh things that we've been doing as a brand. So when you find, and you sort of know these people, right? Again, the digital footprint is something that's so easy to today identify and segment consumers. You kind of find where they are today. Are they new to brand? Are they in market for furniture? Have they considered my brand or not? So you find these audiences. So very simple brand narrative was for an audience who didn't consider me but wanted to buy furniture. Then there were brand narratives which had a little bit of, you have your end slates of sale going on, which is a little bit of a balance of both, right? And then you have your purebred performance, sale led, but still having a little bit of equity elements on them. So we did that. We kind of had a full-blown campaign for considerers, non-considerers, to sort of move them into the brand. We did a whole new different campaign for the product launch that we did. It was called Oasis. And that was agnostic of who the consumer is, because we wanted existing, new, everyone to know that there's something fresh that's come from the brand. And for me, again, I truly believe that if somebody wants to, buy a piece of furniture from Urban Ladder, they see a great piece of ad. And when they land on the website, they identify what the pricing is and they should be pleasantly surprised with it. And that's why we kind of, stay a little bit away from some of these very heavy discount-led narratives, while we have to keep them in mind and we have to keep them somewhere just to, build a little bit of intrigue. But we kind of stay away and we let people discover the pricing when they're at the store or on the website. And more often than not, what we've heard from consumers is that they're pleasantly surprised, because what they saw, they thought would be extremely out of their reach. But when they discovered it on in-store or in our app or in-store, they've actually found it, pleasantly surprising. And that actually becomes the pivotal point of purchase, because what could have been a 10-12 day purchase actually becomes a 3-4 day purchase, because it's such a big delight in terms of price.
So, Krisha, nice perspective. Sometimes it's not just about your brand or how strong your campaigns are or your positioning or communication is. It's about how your product is and your brand is being perceived by the audience, your consumers, right? Perhaps how your stores are placed. Are they in good vicinity within cities? or they have, product in the right shape. Sometimes I've seen that there have been some brand that I've personally visited, the products which are shown as display, couple of those were torn, some had stains on them, right? Do you think these elements do make some sort of impact on buying journey, or at least consideration for the buyers?
I mean, of course, because you know, as Indians, every time you're buying a large piece of furniture, you enter a store to actually touch, feel, experience the product, and it becomes a very important sort of movement in your purchase journey.
Agree.
And that's something that we don't take very lightly. So, and I don't think anyone should, truly. But at Urban Ladder, what we do is our furniture is, our entire store, visual merchandising is done in such a way that everything that we place in our store actually doesn't look like a display piece, but looks like it's part of a home. That's where we kind of make sure the way it's placed, the background doesn't have a strong spotlight on it, or it doesn't, it's not a, you go to these car showrooms and you see a lot of very unique independent displays, right? Here we actually put together a very cohesive look for our consumer. And the idea is that not just for you to experience what you're looking for, but for you to actually get inspired, for you to and get inspired by the overall design aesthetics that we've put in a lot of thought with, and built with, and for you to just get inspired to sort of do your entire house accordingly. So yeah, touch points very important. In general, I don't know why there are products that are like that, but it's something that is, I think.
But do you think retail would play a crucial role when it comes to building a brand? Because the way a brand looks or the way a brand greets their customer, I think that plays a major role in buyer satisfaction or a purchase journey.
Yeah.
So do you think if a brand is focused on building, a long-term vision or a name in a cluttered market?
Yeah, I think so, because like I said, it's an important touch point for a consumer in decision making. It's also the first true human interaction you're having with the brand, right? I can say a lot of things I want to say in creatives and communication, but the first time you're actually experiencing an Urban Ladder is when you're talking to somebody in the store. So it's very important that that is in line with what you have as your larger vision. In fact, when we sat and did the whole repositioning of the brand, the first set of people we wanted to align with and take cascade this positioning was to the store folks. And every single store manager in every single store probably has gone through the entire spiel of what we're trying to do as a brand, why are we doing it, what do we want customers to go through when they interact with the brand. And yeah, I mean, again, their buy-in is as important, right? So the idea is for them to also encourage and be on board with that brand thought, and that's the only way to sort of go ahead, right? So important touch point.
So on a lighter note, you're a very hands-on marketer, right? Have you given personal training to any of your staff at any store, perhaps, on how to greet customers or probably look at those, key factors which will help people feel special?
Yeah, I mean, we do regular store visits all the time.
I'm referring to any incident wherein you've, shared your insights or maybe some points of training.
So I, every time I go to a store, I usually, like engaging with the consumers by myself. So I generally ask them a lot of questions. I go through sort of, understanding of how they came about. Of course, from a brand point of view, how did they choose to walk into an Urban Ladder store, etc. But I also would love to answer some of their queries on product. And I feel like if I'm not able to address them, then I probably know a little lesser of my product than I should. So it's a good, reality check for me on how much I know of what we are actually, selling. And at the same time, I sort of always have somebody shadowing me. So we do a sort of, tagged approach where I am talking to a consumer and someone from sales is watching. Probably I take some feedback from them as well. And that more often than not, I've also taken feedback from them. It happens the other way around also, right? There are some things that some very unique queries customers come and ask us, and it could be very brand led, the way the sales folks could answer them. So again, we have a lot of to and fro on those things.
Interesting perspective, Krisha. See, you've worked with the different FMCG brands, and now you're taking care of, a consumer product brand. If we were to look at your experience, your, overall career, how would you design those brand codes? Those visual, verbal, experimental codes, which will help a brand accumulate authority and equity over a period of time. You want to get those, cheat sheets from me, in simple words.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have as much experience as you're looking for, but for the few brands that I've worked with in the past, um, I think as a marketer, I've taken every opportunity to sort of build brand assets, right? Which are within my function, outside my function. So, Paperboard is one such example where, visual codes were very strong. Everyone knows the brand, everyone knows the positioning of memories that it holds. But, we took social media, right? Like, something that most marketers almost ignore sometimes. But we sort of built a lot of, work around what does emotional narrative of memory actually translate to in terms of a social media strategy. And the amount of work that we've put in to sort of, just get that visual, narrative right from small things that, when we were young, we had a lot of illustrations because we read a lot of comics. We did a lot of, we used to use crayons, watercolors. So there's been so much work and iteration on whether we use crayons, watercolors, what do we do to sort of build that one, illustration style that became the paperboard narrative on social media. And that kind of got extended where anytime you scroll a post and you see something like that, it's a paperboard ad, and it almost becomes synonymous to, the brand. We've used it so many places, in so many places, in so many different ways, that, it kind of now has become such a strong asset from just the social media strategy, right? Um, Again, similar, in terms of just the tone of voice, right? Paperboard, we used a very different tone of voice in terms of a very innocent, childlike tone of voice. We used it in so many different ways. We had one such, I'll just give you an example. We had a lot of stock of some products at one point, and we ran a buy one, get one, offer on a modern trade shelf, and you have very little space because it's one shelf talker that you have. um we actually turned that into a brand story, where we brought about this whole narrative of, when you have a birthday party, you make something extra and you want to give away what you have to your friends and family. And overnight that became like almost a viral sort of a image that floated around with a lot of marketeers. So very fun, interesting ways to build such small assets in tone of voice, in visuals, even experiential, right? While everyone loves the way the pack looks, there's a lot of science that has gone behind why that pack has its ergonomics, right? So for example, when we've all grown up, we've drank beverages out of a straw. So every time you open a paperboard pack and you actually drink from it, it feels like you're actually drinking from a straw, and it takes you back and transports you into that, moment when you were younger and actually drank out of that. So, different ways of actually building that. At Urban Ladder, we've taken new products and actually taken it, given it a very different spin on building that whole design first kind of narrative, right? So I find different touch points. I try to find as many touch points in and beyond. There's one whole, there's a lot of rains going on in Bombay right now, Mumbai, sorry, but so we've had a lot of delay in supply chain for Urban Ladder. So of course we have a lot of consumers who are unhappy with what was happening. We turned that into a brand story where we send them a very beautiful apology letter in a very nice brand voice. We've given them a lot of of course goodies along with that. But I take every such tactical event or cross functional opportunity to build assets that usually compound for the brand beyond.
That actually is a very beautiful way of marrying distribution, retail towards brand equity, right? So you were taking care of Paperboat, the entire brand itself. You've launched a lot of successful campaigns. While we're not discussing any specific campaign as of now, uh, but I would like to understand from your point of view, in case if you're launching a new SKU under the brand, right? What are those key elements or things that you would probably look at, which will tell you whether this will help build the overall brand equity or it'll, somehow fragment the overall thought?
Yeah, I think for me, launching a new product is always, I go back and see that is it going to be part of the chapter from the book that you're reading, or is it going to be something that stays away? And usually, ideally, you do not want to launch a product if it doesn't marry your larger brand philosophy, right? So I make sure I look at those aspects. But of course, there have been instances like Paperboat where we launched a sub brand called Swing. It doesn't really fit in the larger brand narrative, but it has a huge TAM, a much larger TAM than what the mother brand actually is sitting with. And we consciously then built it into a sub brand form, still borrowing a little bit from the mother brand, but eventually the idea is to phase it out and to actually move away from it. So I think there are sometimes conscious calls that you need to take, even though something does not fit, but that's where you marry business versus marketing and actually take that trade off, right? I was actually fortunate to be a part of Himalayas personal care equity film, right? So we made a whole what does Himalaya stand for narrative, and there we kind of had an umbrella thought what the mother brand should hold. And because it's a house of brands, they have so many different business verticals that actually operate with the same brand. So when we did that, we actually, before we even started with mother brand, we started writing down what each business vertical slash product slash SKU will either borrow or give to the larger, equity narrative. So I think for me, I would make sure that if I had a choice, an SKU should always follow either take ahead a narrative or give a narrative a whole new spin, like bring a new facet to the equity that we're trying to build.
Okay, super. We are towards the end of the session here. I think I would need one key advice from you for the new age marketers, especially people who are building brand and they're, solely focused on building the equity in a cluttered space, especially. What would be those 3 or 4 key ideas that you would want to give to them?
I think like I probably summarizing the conversation, making sure that you use every opportunity to create an asset across your function, beyond your function, smaller things like CRMs, social media, which usually probably are maybe not the very exciting sides of brand building, but they are. And if you actually treat it like as asset building, mediums, so I would expect that anyone who wants to actually work around building or learning how to build equity should actually look at all these opportunities in their org, outside their org, cross functionally, and actually just first spend a lot of time understanding positioning and then go after building assets from there. Yeah.
So you spoke about platforms, right? Platforms have a habit of changing. I would not say change, they evolve. And as and when a platform evolves, the whole algorithm which actually runs the platform and the visibility rule, they also change alongside, right? If I'm a marketer, right, and I'm looking at these algorithms, these platforms as a whole, what should I consider, in my design or asset strategy or compounding asset strategy that becomes or that remains relevant and that is agile and resilient in all these changes?
See, the beautiful thing about having algorithm-based campaigns today is content is now more important than before.
Agree.
And, it's always fun because it's digital. It's fun to experiment with content. It opens up a whole new plethora of ideas in terms of what you can do with content. You won't believe the most highest or the best performing performance marketing campaign at Urban Ladder that we actually run, which does so well, is something that we've shot for brand. It's a very beautiful, close, tight shots of product, which actually romanticizes, just say, a couch, right? And it was always meant to be brand building assets, but it's all about just plugging them into your perf campaigns and seeing if they actually work or not, and you'll be pleasantly surprised to see some of them actually do. So for me, I think experimenting, staying agile, because content is so important, refreshing it regularly, ensuring that you're actually going a little crazy and trying very different things in content becomes very important. There are times where, I've ran brand films on perf campaigns just because I get lowest CPMs. So, I think with this setup, I think the world is your oyster and it's easy to just play around with it the way you want.
Now, let's have a quick round of question. I mean, a session where I'm going to ask you a few questions, and within fraction of second, I expect you to give your answer. I'll make it very simple and organic for you. So, if we were to set precedence between two options, I want to see which option would you go ahead with. If I say, let's say, brand equity is important or sales?
Equity.
Equity. Campaign execution or campaign idea?
Execution.
New product in the existing market or existing product in a new market?
Both. Difficult to say. But I think existing product in the new market is always easier.
Dashboard, numbers, or instinct?
Numbers and
Numbers. What if some ideas that you've executed doesn't go as planned? What your response is going to be in the first 24 hours?
Fail fast, learn fast, move fast.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you. So for all the viewers, thank you so much for watching. This was Yatin, and with us we had Ms. Krisha Turakia. Thanks, Krisha. Thanks for watching, guys. This was Ms. Krisha Turakia, Head Revenue and Marketing, Urban Ladder. Thanks and stay tuned.